Well, hello everyone, welcome to episode 102. I'm going to start with the Land Cruiser. Let's just dig straight in this week rather than going on about test drives and stuff. We got the Xylan plating batch back for this, which was basically holding up loads of jobs. There was a ton of little bolts that we were getting Xylan plated because all the exterior fasteners are going black. And it's a really good process for coating bolts black because you tend to get those natural black finish ones which instantly rust. And then you can get aluminium anodized bolts, but obviously they tend to strip the threads and then very easily they're not that strong. So a great way of doing it is stainless steel fasteners that are then Xylan coated black. So that's allowed us to do a load of assembly bits. So we've got the latches on the bonnet that basically fasten the windscreen down. If you decide to take the roof off and fold the windscreen forward, it can latch to the bonnet. The actual latch pieces for that, we completely disassembled those. There's a little rivet in the top of here which we ground out so we could take those into their individual component parts, have them Xylan and then put it all back together. I think we put new springs in them as well because they're kind of sprung to hook on. And they're the same fasteners that hold the bonnet down. Now we haven't attached those, we've done the same process to them, but they attach to the front of the bonnet here and then hook under these little receivers, which I probably didn't mention recently. We may have done in the past that we made new ones of these. These are normally like a spot welded steel piece on the wing, which consequently means there's quite a big area you can't get paint onto under here, and they tend to rust out around the edge of there. And also being steel, where the latch comes onto them and scratches the paint off, they'll tend to rust there. So we machined these little aluminium ones that have been black anodized. They've actually got some big deep bosses so we could get a decent thread in which go through some big holes in the wing. And then there's like a receiver plate on the back that's kind of quite deep counterboard for those bosses to sit into so we can bolt through with a decent thread length, but it's really slim on the outside. So those are on as well. These, we bought these new, but we did strip them apart and repaint the silver part because we wanted continuity between all the silver bits. So the bumper we painted silver, these, and then the glove box lid and the instrument panel surround, which I think they were also painted last week. But that's allowed those to go on. We've got the headlights in now. I think we were just waiting for the, again, Xylan parts, the bowls at the back that they sit into. We used the original steel ones, Xylan coated them. So headlights and grille are on now. We're just waiting for the radiator. So that's at Concept Racing at the minute. They're doing us an aluminium version of the original, but modified. And we're integrating an oil cooler into the bottom. And we've received back from machining a flange which is going to be welded to the bottom tank of that radiator. And then like a billet mounting plate that the oil cooler core will attach to. So we've got an oil cooler core that goes through with O-ring seals and lock rings on the hose fittings, that plate, and then that plate bolts on with an O-ring as well. So essentially we've got an oil cooler core in the bottom tank of the radiator, so it's a water to oil cooler. But it means we can still remove that core if we want to. So for serviceability, if that core failed for any reason, it doesn't scrap the radiator or mean you've got to cut the tanks apart, you can just unbolt it and take it out. So that's a nice little touch. And also from Concept Racing, I think we showed that we received these tanks back. You can see now how they sit in these little saddles we fabricated. This one's going to be screen wash, that one's the radiator expansion overflow tank. And then other things that allowed us to refit with having some bolts now with the doors, so they're theoretically on for the final time now. We've got the mirror mounts on. We're going to fit the mirrors soon actually, because we're going way back now. We machined our own kind of mirror backing and mounting piece which attached to the original arm. And then another really smart little billet part that we made was the rear door handle, which is now fitted. Now originally it was like a sort of chrome handle, and the shaft out of the handle actually unbelievably almost ran directly in a hole in the sheet metal of the rear door. So it just passed through a hole and then went into the mechanism on the inside. But there was nothing really supporting it, there was no bearing of any sort, it was literally just rubbing metal on metal. So George designed a little plinth, which is actually held in by the lock barrel that sits underneath, so it surrounds that as well. But then that plinth also holds a bronze bush, that a new handle which we made. Again, Andy at Concept 303 did the machining, but we designed it fairly simple. It's not exactly the same as the original, slightly stylised, but it's fairly simple handle that Andy machined in aluminium, and then the shaft goes through and actuates the original lock on the inside. But that was a nice little, well, again, as with all the hinges and things where we've remade those in billet, it not only adds a subtle kind of change visually to the original, but it's just functionality wise, it means it's not going to corrode, it's not going to wear. So happy with that. On the subject of hinges, we also got the bonnet hinges back from machining, which more or less completes the whole set now. We didn't do the windscreen hinges because of their complicated shape. That have been a really awkward part to machine, and in reality I don't think this windscreen will ever get folded down. I mean, there's a very, very small chance he might decide to take the top off, but from what the customer's told me, it's a very outside chance, so we decided to leave that alone. But all of the other hinges are now our own design, machined ones with bronze bushes in. So that's basically where we're at with that. Oh, I mentioned the fuel tanks as well, because I think we showed them before, but we hadn't mentioned that we were getting them in the car now. I think we showed them when we'd got the sort of unfinished tanks back from Concept Racing, so we could set the fuel filler alignment and just check the fit before they welded the bottoms in. So they've done that now. Those are an amazingly good fit. George was blowing his own trumpet, so to speak, when he put the foam. We put sort of allowed for like a 10mm foam liner in there, and they're almost just like a perfect interference fit in there. So really happy with that. And then we've fitted the little machined top caps we've made for those, which hold, on one side they hold the Bosch high pressure pump, the other one's just basically a pickup pipe with a strainer on the bottom, and then there's a Venturi pump that's going to go on the top that essentially uses the force of the returning fuel from the fuel rail to suck out of the slave tank and fill the main tank. So once the tanks drop below the joining pipe that joins the two, it means that the second tank is always pulled into the first tank, so you don't end up with a situation where there's still a load of fuel in one tank and the main tank with the high pressure pumps used all of its fuel. So that's about where we're at with that. Next steps probably on this are going to be inlet manifold manufacture. This is just the original, just lying on here, but we're doing our own version. Radiator in, probably getting the bumpers and bonnet on. So yeah, we're kind of very much light at the end of the tunnel on this one now. Wiring's being done at the minute, and we'll soon be onto the exhaust system as well. And speaking of light at the end of the tunnel, Mustang, which is currently over the pit, but made its way over the pit under its own power. So yesterday we drove this, albeit only manoeuvring around here, under its own steam for the first time. So we'd fired it up previously, but we'd kind of got a cobbled up electrical system just to fire it up. Adam, for quite a few weeks now, has been working on the wiring of the car, which I think we did the last bits of it yesterday. Electrically powered everything up a few days ago, which went really well actually. As first electrical power-ups go, I think we had one side light bulb out, and there was a wire which we'd forgotten to connect for the interior light, and I think they were the only things that didn't work. Oh, and the fan, he forgot to put a fuse in the fan blower feed, and we was trying to work out why the blower wouldn't work until he realised, yeah, there's no fuse in it. But yeah, it went really well. Love the Dakota Digital dash we've got for it. Looks really smart, very classic looking, but you know, stepper motor drives on all the needles. Nice little LCD display which you can view a lot of additional information on. So that adds a nice little touch on the inside. And then yeah, we topped up the transmission fluid on it yesterday, and yeah, for the very first time, put it in gear, drove it out there, backed it onto here. Only thing we noticed, which I think is what Adam's working on at the moment, is when it was on full lock there was a power steering fluid leak, so we're just looking into what was causing that. And then really the big remaining thing on this now is just sorting out the seats. Quite a long while ago we talked about using some newer Mustang seats in it, but we tried them, and because of the height of the seat, mainly due to all the electrical adjustment components, they just sat too high, and basically your legs were jammed against the bottom of the steering wheel even in their lowest position. So we're looking at using some sort of classic Recaros, the type they used to have in Capris and Mantas and that sort of thing. So we've got a used one to try in here, and then if we're happy with that, I'm just going to send some photos to the owner today, we're going to reupholster those to match the black vinyl rear seats, and that should be a good solution. Those sort of classic Recaros, I think they're LXs, they're a good suiting to a lot of older cars because they look classic but fairly neutral looking, so they suit a lot of different older cars visually, and they're nice and slim, so they don't look excessively large, but they're also very supportive, so you can sort of feel quite well supported while driving in a spirited fashion, shall we say. So that's where the Mustang's at. Let's have a little, yeah, let's go through here. We'll come back to the Stratos in a second. Manto, back on with this. We had a bit of a pause on this. Bobby's on with this at the minute. Most of his focus has been braking system, so this is running a Volvo rear axle. One of the remaining jobs on that, which needed doing, was the handbrake cable assembly. So we've sort of rejigged how the handbrake works. It's using the Volvo cable still, so the end that suits the shoes inside the disc bell fits there, but then we've totally changed the way the rest of the cables work. They now sweep forward. They've lost all the mechanism that normally sits on the axle, and they come forward to the prop shaft cross member, or the prop shaft centre bearing cross member, which is another job Bobby's been on with. So that cross member supports the centre bearing for the prop shaft, but also now will support the sort of cable outer retainers for the handbrake. And that's the point at which they'll then transition to the original Manta handbrake lever, where the pull rod on that will have a little compensator is the wrong word, but a little balancer which attaches to the two cable inners just forward of that cross member. So that's about done, and then he's moved on to the brake plumbing. So we're running the Teflon braided hoses on the axle, T-piece on the axle, run the sort of front to rear hose down there. I think he's done the front lines now. We're just looking at mounting the bias valve. So we're just going to put a restrictor in the rear, which is something we do on most of the cars where we've got brake conversions on them. So you can fettle the front to rear bias, not necessarily in a motorsport fashion as you would perhaps from inside the cockpit. It's just a case of having that adjustment there, so we can play with the front to rear bias until we're happy it's correct, given that the components are completely non-standard and it's entirely feasible that there could be an excessive amount of pressure on the rear. So yeah, that's going well actually. We're going to do the hydraulic, the fluid reservoir for the hydraulic clutch, and then probably move on to some work on the gearbox. One of the things, the gearbox was actually supplied to us by the customer on this, and we, as a rebuilt gearbox, we fitted it, and then when we went to fill it with fluid, went to undo the plug, and it just kind of came out in our hand without turning, and we realised that somebody had actually chemical metaled the plug into the box because the threads had stripped. And because it's very tight in the tunnel, there's no way we can get in to tap the threads, and obviously you wouldn't really want to from the point of view of swarf going into the box anyway. And if that's been done on a supposedly refurbished gearbox, I'm a bit dubious as to the rest of the refurbishment quality. So that's going to come out and we're going to send that away to actually be properly refurbished. And that can go in. But yeah, this is progressing pretty well. The Morris, John's just on primarily with fitting the heater unit. I think last time we were at the tail end of a load of trauma where we had to take the gearbox out. So that's all back in now. Happy with how that's all gone. We've done a few other little jobs that have been on the cards in the engine bay. So the water rail was one. We were struggling on positions for water temp sensors. We need one for the instruments, one for the engine. And the positions on the water rail where you would normally put those were interrupted by the exhaust manifold. Now we've found there was a sort of flat plinth on part of the rail where we were able to drill and tap for the gauge sender, but it's too close to the side of the rocker cover to fit the ECU sender in there, so we took it off and welded a little boss on the back part on the top of the sender, top of the rail, so we could put the ECU sender in there. And then that was stripped and repainted crackle black. So that's another little job ticked off in there. John had, although he's removed it at the minute, John had the instrument cluster in. which looks really nice. I'm so happy with how that's come out. That's from Classic Instruments. I think it's more or less one of their standard instrument packs, and we basically refabricated part of the dash, well, the part where the speedo goes, that's slightly bigger to compensate for the fact I think it was maybe half or quarter of an inch bigger than the original Morris one. But that then has your telltales, indicator, main beam telltales, oil pressure, coolant temperature, volts and fuel level, and speed and tacho all on that one unit. So that looks smart now. He's actually took it out at the minute because we're just going through the incredible trauma of trying to route the aircon and heating ducting behind the dash, and we knew this was always going to be awkward because the space behind the dash on this is tiny, and we've got not only all of the master cylinders back there, we've got 2 power distribution modules, we've got the engine ECU, we've got that whole heating and aircon unit, and then we've got the water hoses to it, the refrigerant lines to it, the valve for the water hose, and then we've got to get ducting to the demist vents and ducting to the main dash vents. Now, we had it all mocked up when it was at metalwork stage, and it all kind of looked like it was going to fit in place, and I think it will, but it's incredibly tight to work behind the dash. Looking at the back of the car, we've got the little machined number plate lamp / reverse camera housing on that we made a while ago. And I think once John's finished what he's doing on here, the next steps are going to be to start getting more of the interior together so we can get the lower dash in now. Once that lot's in, start working on getting the carpets, console in, headlining. We've also got the little anodised corner pieces that sit at the front of the door. They hold the mirrors, and they also sort of form the front part of where the glass run is. So I'm looking forward to getting all that lot together because, of course, it's that total transformation to single piece glass with those integrated mirror mounts on. Quite a lot of work, so I'll be excited to see the culmination of all that work. Slightly nervous that it all works correctly, but hopefully electric windows, single piece glass, it's custom glass, and the mirror mounts integrated into it. So fingers crossed that all goes to plan. E-Type, Project Norman. So James has been on with a few jobs on that. It's basically engine component mounting, so it's doing the mountings for the alternator, which sits on the off side of the engine, aircon compressor, which sit on the near side. It's just drawing those up at the moment. They'll be machined parts. He previously did the mounting for the electro-hydraulic steering pump, which sits sort of down on the offside in front of the footwell over there. And then we've got the mountings for the coil packs in the centre of the engine there. And it's all basically about trying to get all the ancillaries nice and compactly located on the engine so that we can keep it fairly minimal looking, and then we'll have a cover over that centre which hides the coil packs, as well as the throttle bodies, which I'm sure when I say it will be controversial, but I'm sure when you see the end result you'll appreciate why we've done it. We've now fully trialled all of the throttle linkage mechanisms, so those parts are ready to be machined. And I think as soon as we've got the aircon and the alternator mounted, we'll then be able to do the steering rack mounts, because we're just waiting to get the alternator in there so we know exactly what angle the pinion shaft on the steering rack's got to sit at for the downlink to clear the alternator. Once we've got that sussed, we'll make the mounts for the steering rack. And we'll be making good progress at that point. I think one of the next things we'll tackle is the pedal box. We're talking about doing a machine version of the pedal pivot box arrangement that actually integrates the reservoir into it, rather than having separate sort of hose-fed pots. We'll try and do it so they're actually, the reservoirs bolt with O-rings or copper washers straight onto the master cylinder, and actually is an integrated part of that whole pedal pivot arrangement. And that then opens the possibility of doing the same thing on this side, because it's got the pattern for the left-hand drive pedal box there, maybe as a breather tank or a screen wash tank. I'm trying to get my words out. So we'll see. That's the sort of plan that's up in the air at the minute, because we need to plan out exactly how all the HVAC system's going to fit around there first. And then we're pretty much at the point already that we can do a trial sitting with the owner, so that'll be on the cards very soon on that. If you follow me this way, a couple of things to mention on Stratos. Obviously, we saw it being tested. wasn't a lot really as a result of testing that needed changing. One of the things we already knew needed changing was that the fans weren't really up to scratch on it. It was absolutely fine temperature-wise when going around the track, but when just sat stationary, the temperatures would get to sort of 96, 97, fans on, which should be the point at which the temperature gets pulled down and the fans kick out again, but they would just stay on and the temperature was pretty much just sticking stationary. So, you know, with it being fine, even when you were tootling around at 30 miles an hour, it's a clear indication of the fans being underpowered. So we've got two much more powerful fans. It had some sort of fairly cheap non-SPAL type fans on it, and I don't really know why. I'm assuming that they came with the kit originally, because certainly 10 years ago, I would say, we learnt the lesson that the sort of reproduction versions of those SPAL fans, although they look the same, have about 1/10 of the power and don't seem to shift anywhere near enough air. So we've got some decent fans on there now, so that will solve that one. We've also now painted the air intake ears, as they seem to have become known, and the rear louver panel, that's gone silver. We will be designing a new front louver panel, which will also go silver, so it'll have the two silver panels there. The wheels have also been stripped, so it's actually now rolling around on another set of wheels, which we had done for it absolutely ages ago. I don't even know if we were doing the Uncut videos when we did that. So they're basically Centerlock Ronal turbos, looking very dirty at the minute. I must apologise on the fact they're covered in dust, but this was kind of the B set of wheels for it. Still a little bit of work just to work on clearances and things for those, but it's handy to have them here so we can roll it around on these whilst we're having the other ones painted. So the intention was to colour change the others, although in all honesty the powder coat had cracked for some reason. I don't know, you know, we bought those wheels already powder coated, and on the front ones only, they'd cracked and crazed all over the powder coat, so they needed stripping anyway, so we've had them chemically stripped. And the guys here, rather than powder coating this time, the guys are going to paint them. So we're just prepping them at the moment for paint, and we're going to paint them the same silver that the rear louver and the front louver will be. So this is all kind of a nod to the Stratos Zero concept, which we've taken a lot of little elements from all over. So the upholstery pattern on the seats, for instance, obviously the exterior colour of the car. These are all little nods, and the triangular window shape on the rear louver panel. They're all kind of little nods to that concept car, the Stratos Zero concept car. So that's where we're at with that, and those with the keen eye will probably have seen that Kaiser 2's been lurking in the background for a while, and that's basically been waiting for STU to get to a suitable moment to pause on the Churchill quarter panels, so we can do the dash. So on this, we're one of the few things on this car that was actually left unmodified, effectively. Well, it was modified, but it was still the original parts, was actually the wood, the dash wood, which when the car came here looked one of the nicer looking parts of the car. But with everything else done, although there was an element of thinking, it's quite nice to have one little original touch of the original car in it, it kind of didn't look the same quality as the rest of it. And the owner also thought, with hindsight, it would be nice to have a full-size nav screen in it. So what we're doing now is Stu's remaking the dash in aluminium, and we're changing the layout quite a lot. So originally we were also restricted by the fact it had two little tiny vents, which I think were just supposed to be side window demisters. There was no specific face vents on it. So we're also taking the opportunity to get some decent sized face vents in the dash, integrate a nav screen, and also just change the layout, because it was a bit scattered in terms of the switch gear. So we're just making that a bit more uniform. We're getting rid of the ashtray, which is redundant, changing the ignition barrel position to the other side of the column so it's a bit more user-friendly, making everything a bit more symmetrical, and then those panels will be hydro-dipped with the wood grain finish, and then we'll also, some of the bits that are remaining as wood, so the surround around the windscreen and the instrument cluster itself, those are wood, but we'll also be sealing those with epoxy primer and hydro dipping those with a wood grain finish. I know that sounds ridiculous, but this is what we also did on a lot of Utah, whereby we can get that wood grain finish on everything that's uniform throughout, but some of the parts can be made in metal, some of them can be made in wood. So that's how we're doing that. So yeah, looking forward now to seeing that take shape and have that Alpine nav screen in there and a nice, smooth, minimal, less cluttered dash. So that's where we're at with that. And I think on that note, I shall hand over to Nat for the metalwork side of things, and I'll see you next week.
Well, thanks Cal, and through in fabrication, I've got my best shorts on, so we'll start from here. Project 1 Escort, and things have been forging ahead a little bit on this. I've been doing a few jobs on it, Tom's been doing a lot of work on it. Tom has been doing some really quite awkward fabrication, disproportionately time-consuming parts of the fabrication on this, which I kind of knew it was going to be. Following on from the beauty and success of the dashboard is some underpinnings fabrication, which is like the opposite end of the spectrum from the showy stuff, but almost no less awkward, which is the rear chassis rail sections. They're nowhere near as complicated in shaping, but quite complicated in actually making them fit everywhere they need to fit, because they're a pretty important structural part. Where we put the turrets on the car, we actually cut through the original chassis rail completely, because the struts, with the inclination angle of the rear struts that we need to get the correct geometry, they actually go through the line of the original chassis rail. So what we do is cut the turret through the chassis rail, then build a new rail that travels around the bottom of the turret. And in order to do that, we have to shape quite a complicated little piece that goes around there, which Tom's been doing. I did a drawing on CAD and got all that in place on CAD to work out the angles and then flat pattern the parts I needed to flat pattern, get all that sorted out, which we've done. And as I say, Tom's then picked up where I'd sort of left off, having done the easy bit of the CAD. He's then shaped up the steel, made the rail, flanged it all, got all that tacked in place, then made the vertical sections of the rail, flanged those, got them in place, got all that welded together, and got all that finished, got all that stitched up. He's then finished welding the front mounts for the rear subframe in, and then he's moved on to the rear mountings for the rear subframe. The very back one ties into the rear face of the suspension turret. And what we do there is we've spot welded in a reinforcing plate into the inside of the turret, the bit where the coilover will sit, with a hole bored through that and through the turret. So there's 2 layers of 16 gauge, so it's 3.2 mil, at least 3 mil thick there, this steel then, so it's carrying a good load. As I say, the spot welded on spreader plate just to make sure that there's no cracking occurs there. And then there's a 1-inch hole bored through that, dead in line with the bolt that carries the rear subframe bush. So we've used a bolt, we've put a point onto a bolt, put it through the hole, used that as a crude alignment punch, made a punch in the plate there, in the bottom of the turret there, then drilled through that hole to give us a centering hole, then hole sawed that out to 25 mil to get us a nice, accurate, 1-inch hole. Hole sawed that out to 1 inch so that it's dead in line with the bushes, and then I machined a pair of top hat discs that are the same diameter as the head of the poly bush that's going in there, which is a leaf spring bush, can't remember what vehicle it's for, but the poly bush that's going in there to carry the rear frame. There's a steel disc the same diameter as the head of that bush, with a turned down shoulder to 1 inch that then goes through the hole in the turret, and then the whole lot's welded around, so it's pushed through, bolted up to the suspension bush, and then MIG welded around inside the turret, and then it's partially MIG welded at the back, and then we'll finish MIG welding on the subframe side when we drop the subframe out and have the car on the rotisserie. So, a lot of waffle, but basically finishing the rear subframe mountings. Tom's then moved on to fitting the 2 sort of side sections of the rear raised floor. I'd made those end of week before last, I think, made them a while ago anyway. So he's just working on fitting those now, because I kind of templated him up, got them to that stage, but didn't actually fit them. So he's working on fitting those, and then also templating up the big piece that's going to go all the way up the middle and fill in the whole of the top of that area. So I'll have various reinforcing beads pressed into it, and a chunk of other work done. So he's working on that piece at the moment in order to make that full centre section that covers all of that lot. And that's where he's at on that. Then a little aside on this car, George has actually been doing a bit of work on the door handles. It's slightly complicated, this bit. As usual, everything becomes more complicated. It'd be very simple to use the original late Mark 1 Escort door handles that both of the 2 Mark 1 Escorts that we're working on came with. However, we don't like the late Mark 1 Escort handles. We personally think they look a bit rubbish. We like the early type Mark 1 Escort door handles. So what we've done is revised the car, the bits of the car to use the early, well, the car will take the late mechanism latches. We want to use the late type latches for the early type handles. The early type handles are actually surprisingly difficult to get hold of, and there are a number of aspects of them that mean we can't really use them in the way we want to use them, even if we could get hold of them. So George is actually doing a redesign so that we can have a handle that looks like the early type Martin Escort door handle, but has a different locking mechanism in it, so that we can actually get new locks. One of the problems is actually getting the locks for the old type mechanism. We're stuck with second-hand ones that may or may not come with keys. All of the old used parts scenario. So what we're trying to do is come up with a new handle that's all new parts, that looks like the original early type Martin Escort handle, but has a new lock available with new keys. So, and that also then has an internal mechanism that actually unbolts, so that it can then operate the late type Mark 1 Escort door catch, if that makes sense. Now, we're aware as an offshoot of this, before a lot of messages come in rolling in after this video telling me that Motorsport Tools are doing a Martin Escort door catch with a bolt-on inner piece that will operate those catches. Yes, I'm aware of the fact they are, but it is the late type outer that they're doing, and we don't like the late type outer. I personally don't like the look of it at all. I think it looks clunky, whereas the early type looks good. So I think there may be another reason for them doing it, which I won't allude to right now, but they probably have their reason for doing the late type Mark 1. However, we have a reason for wanting to do the early type on this, so that's why we haven't just used one of those. There's always a reason for things, even if we don't say it. So that's all of that. Picking up on another comment I noticed on the video, I don't know whether it's still there. Somebody had made a comment about the fact that the car is on standard arches on the back and wide arches on the front. We love the look of it. We thought we really liked it like that. We thought everybody would like it like that. So I can't think why on earth you would have thought that would be wrong. But just in case you did think that might be wrong, if you watch this space over the next few weeks, you'll see what we're actually doing and the reason why the car's like that, because we're not using these arches on the front and we're not using these arches on the back. Both of them are wrong. Again, there's a reason to all of this. It isn't an accident that the car is different widths front to rear, and it isn't an accident that none of those arches are the arches we're actually finishing with. So watch this space and you'll see that develop. Further to that, we've been throwing a Capri. I don't know if I mentioned this last time. Seat. We've got some old damaged Capri Recaros, just as the cheapest Recaros we could find, basically, because they're not actually going to be used. With the car, we'll be having brand new Recaros from Recaro in it. But we don't want to do the mock-up at this stage with a brand new seat, because inevitably I'm going to put weld burns through it or do some damage to it or something. So we've got an old Capri Recaro that we can do the mock-up with, and I've very quickly lashed together, although it's been knocked around and Tom's moved it, so it's kind of in on a diagonal at the minute. But I made a crude frame that's movable, that's not welded into the car, that enables you to sit in the car on the seat with some blocks of wood under the back to change the height, but that actually sits it level between the inner sill and the transmission tunnel, and means that we can do a seating mock-up, because the customer is going to come fairly imminently now to have a sit in to adjust instrumentation angle, check steering wheel position, and basically hold the steering wheel so that we can set the optimum steering wheel position fore and aft, up and down an angle, set the instrument angle so that it's straight in eye line and clearing the steering wheel, and set the seat height and the seat fore and aft and the seat recline, just so that we know that we've got all the adjustments correctly. The seats will be adjustable, but we want to make sure that we have the customer's preferred settings at the centre of the seat's adjustment, not at one extreme of it. Then, if he decides he doesn't quite like it or needs to move things a little bit, it's always got adjustment on the seat. So we'll be doing a seat mock-up to sort all of those things, and then also following on, I've got to carry on with the roll cage and things there. But in tandem with that, I was kind of hoping by this point to have the car rolling. I haven't done because of a couple of things going on, basically largely me not getting enough chance to have done enough work on it, and I'd missed a few jobs. I'd forgotten about a few things I still needed to make in terms of suspension, which leads me on to, actually, I'll lead on to that in a minute because I'm walking past a big hole in the front of the car, so I'll touch on that first. Scott's been doing a little bit of work on the front end of the car, getting the radiator fitted. It's Group 4 Fabrications aluminium radiator that we're using. we've used the Group 4 fabrications ones before, they're generally very nicely made, and also it's easy. Although they're designed for a front electric fan fitment, they're easy to modify for a rear electric fan fitment, whereas most of the other radiators on the market, you have to cut the mounts off. Don't really want to cut the mounts off. On the Group 4 Fabs radiator, the fan mounts are just a pressed-in insert into the frame of the rad, which is no biggie to remove and alter to make the fan rear-mounted. And we want to use a rear-mounted fan because we are putting an air conditioning condenser matrix on the front of the radiator, so we haven't got room for a fan as well. To that end, we're also fitting a water to engine oil cooler in the bottom tank of the radiator, and one of the reasons we're modifying things low down here is A, to allow for the radiator, but B, to then allow for the bottom tank of the radiator to be modified. I'm going to modify that so that it can take a welded on flange, which will then have a bolt-in insert that carries the water to oil heat exchanger that will bolt into the bottom of the radiator. So that's why that's going on. But Scott's been making the return mounts for the radiator there and cutting out the slam panel to get the clearance. The more we look at it, the more we think we might just refabricate the slam panel. The final decision, the jury's still out on that one. We're thinking we might just refabricate this because it looks a bit, we're not really very pleased with it. It doesn't look the best. It's not the best pressing. And we think we might be able to do something that looks a bit neater. So we're probably going to redo that yet. That's going to be cut out and redone and altered. So there's a lot of messing around with the original panel work. It's where it was easier to start with the original panel given how cheap they are, but actually 90% of it's then going in the bin and being modified as usual. So that's where we're at with the front parts. Going back to what I was just saying a minute ago about things I'd forgotten about that I had forgotten I needed to do. I'd forgotten that there were a couple of little jobs left to do on the rear wishbones. The major one of which is these pieces needed doing, and I'd call it a mistake, but a mistake's a bit strong. Criticise myself really. I had done the brackets wrong basically. I drew them based purely on the CAD, and for some reason, and I don't really know why, I'd used an Aurora Bearings model, CAD model of their rose joint, one of those, 5/8 by ½ inch XAM8T, I think they are, or XAM8, yeah, I forget, something like that anyway. Rose joint, which for the clearance between the body and the side of this tube. I don't know what had happened to my senses at the time, but I'd cut it, I'd literally done it so that it was touching the side of the tube. I intended to leave like a 2.5mm gap, 3mm gap, and I'd done it so it was touching it. I don't know what planet I was on when I did that. So I had to revise the drawing and recut these little brackets here, and then in modifying the depth of them in that direction, I had to make a few other changes as well, inevitably you do. So, but anyway, they're done now and all good now, and they're all TIG welded on, so I've TIG welded those onto the 2 sets of wishbones. And then I've also got to make the toe links, which are actually in the machine shop at the moment, but I'm machining the toe link that basically goes between that spherical bearing there and another spherical bearing which will sit basically about there. Obviously there'll be another one in where that bolt is there, and then there's a toe link in there, and then that, being the upright, sits in the middle there, like that. So I need to make the toe links, which are direct threaded into some, I think it's 7/8 OD seamless steel tubing, and so I'm just threading those up at the moment, parting them to length and threading those up at the moment. So that's pretty much where we're at with that lot. The other part was the rear hubs. I think, did we have a bit of footage of us shrinking the sleeves onto them? Hot shrinking the sleeves on? Yeah, we've got some their Mark 1 Mondeo front hubs that I use on the back, but they need sleeving up to match the Freelander wheel bearings. I use the Freelander bearings, it's a common bearing, it's super strong. I imagine you'd never need to change one, they're massive. You can see by the hole it goes into, they're immense. And the other benefit to this whole layout is I can get a super strong Ford, pretty much the strongest that I know of, Ford CV joint in this space here, which is like the Mark 1 Focus RS stroke Mark 2 and 3 Mondeo V6 CV joint, which is a pretty strong outer CV joint, and I can get that through. The spline on that matches the Mark 1 Mondeo hub on the outside, and the CV joint fits perfectly, literally like it was made for the job, into the Freelander upright. So all that works together really well. the only fly in the ointment is the fact that the ID of the Freelander bearing is 44mm. The OD of the standard Mark 1 Mondeo hub is 40mm. So what we do is we turn that down a shade on the Mondeo hub. We just turn that hub down a little bit and then make it a shrink fit, a very, very heavy shrink fit into a piece of seamless tubing that then sleeves us up past 44mm. We then rough turn that 44mm tube, that oversized tube, down to 44.75, something like that, millimeters, and then have it ground. Once all that's done and everything's stabilised and the shrink fit's gone into place and everything, then to ensure it's completely concentric, we then have those cylindrical ground, which has just been done. We've just picked those up from Accurate Grinding in Barwell, our local grinding man, so they've been cylindrical ground for the correct fit in the bearing. So now those hubs can be assembled, which they couldn't this morning. So everything's coming together. I'd like it to have been coming together slightly quicker, but everything is coming together. So that's pretty much, I think, where we're at on Escort. I'll have missed something, but that's pretty much where we're at on the Escort. So I'm going to go, because Jamie's swinging that way, I'm going to go for Churchill next. So we'll come over here. I'm going to lean on it, but not really point it very much, because I probably, shall I open the door? Can I open the door, or is the door shut? No, the door is open. Have you got you've got footage of this anyway. Are you going to come around? Yeah, we can do that, can't we? Then I can get right in the way, but I can point at things. So Stu's been busy in here. He's transferred his attention. He's, I think he used the word plucking up courage or something about the quarter panels, didn't you, Stu? We got Stu right on camera here.
Big step
the quarter panels are down here. And Stu's just, I think right, he said the word plucking up courage. I think what he means is just making sure he hasn't forgotten anything and none of the rest of us have forgotten anything, and giving time for the dust to settle just in case we've missed anything, I think is probably more apt, because Stu doesn't need to pluck up courage for anything. But yeah, basically the quarter panels are ready to go on. As far as any of all of us can tell, they're ready to go on. We're just kind of hovering on that job in that it's not holding anything else up at the minute, so we're just making sure we haven't missed anything on that. So he's moved on to the front end where vast surgery is required, and the not inconsiderable task of making, this is a blow moulded, vacuum formed mock-up casing of the Vintage Air Magnum type climate control unit that we use, or HVAC unit that we use, and they're actually a really good unit. The downside is they're flipping huge, and we need to persuade. I doubt there'll be anybody to do with them will be watching this, but please, can you make us a right-hand drive version of this unit? As it is, this car is going left-hand drive, so ideal, it's not too bad. But if you could make us a right-hand drive one for all of our other builds, that would be really good. Anyway, Stu's been doing the work required in the car to be able to get that in and still have a decent structure in the bulkhead area and have the mountings for all the relevant things, most importantly probably being the pedal box for a start. So that's what he's been up to. For a start, we had a little conflab about it, and we decided to go for an 1.25 inch tube rolled in our tube rolls to follow the curve of the windscreen, stitch welded in across the top of where the dash mountings would go. And that cleared everything and stayed out of the way, and we could then tie that into the top of the diagonal front rail reinforcers, if you like, the stiffeners that run from the top of the A-post down to the front main chassis rails just above the front cross member, which sort of stopped that lot bending. So we've tied that tube's then tied into the tops of those rails, so that adds some stiffness there. And then the lower, there's a lower dash box, I guess you'd call it, which also carries the bulkhead, where the normal pedal box would mount. It was the other side originally on this because it was right-hand drive, but in any case, the pedal box mounts into that bulkhead area. But we need to lose that box. Parts of that box are in the way. Now we could have cut out sections of that box to get clearance and gain some space, but then we're weakening it massively, and it would be pretty ugly and crude to try and just weld plates in to put the strength back into that. Or we could refabricate the box. The box would need to be just bear with me a minute, it's very loud. The box would need to be a different shape. To enable, because it would clash with the back of the engine basically. When the engine's in place, we would have a problem of the box fouling the back of the engine. So the conclusion was, or Stu and I had a bit of a to and fro on it, and concluded that the best line of attack for it would be to fabricate a tubular cross member to go across, which we could we've got a tube bender that would be able to put the appropriate bends into the tube. If we did that in 2-inch tube, it'd be pretty strong, easily as strong as the original box structure. So that's what we've done basically. Long and short is we've used a length of 2-inch 14 gauge seamless steel tube put across with a dog leg in to clear the bottom of the heater unit, and that is also then going to carry the main loads from the pedal box, and also add the main stiffening across the bulkhead. And that again is also tied into the inner A panels and tied into the underside of the main front chassis diagonal reinforcers. So that's the situation with the bulkhead reinforcement. That's progressing, and then Stu's moved on to the pedal box and doing a couple of modifications. It's the Jaguar X300 pedal box that we're using, and also the plan is to use an X300 steering column, a manually telescope and tilt X300 steering column in this car as well. And Stu's just started work on the fit up of the X300 pedal box and the fabrication on the bulkhead to enable that to fit and tie into the tube that we were just talking about. That's pretty much, I think, the end of my waffle on the Churchill Jag. I'll come out from behind here. The workshop did have a CV8 parked in it here. That's now gone, because the CV8 is now gone as of yesterday morning, has gone to KS Composites. So that's now gone. They'll be starting work on that. So watch this space for her progress on getting a large mould made from it, and eventually, sometime down the line, it won't be just for a while yet, the carbon fibre replacement arriving for it. So watch this space on that one. And then I'm going to go around here where Mark's making noise. I don't know how much more noise he's got to make. Let's go around here a minute. I'll let him just do this. I'll stop here for a minute while he's just doing this. Yeah, I've got to go back to a meeting next door. I'll just quickly explain. If you'll pause it just for a sec, I'll do it quick now. I'll do it now. So in here at the moment, Mark literally almost live. We're going to stop, but I can't stop him for long. Otherwise, he's spraying polyester surfacer in our primer area in here, which is also a prep area. Spraying polyester surfacer at the moment. I can't hold him for long because the polyester will go off in his spray gun. But we're doing the extra few bits on the E-Type at the moment. And the major area that well, it's not a major area, it's not a huge amount of work, but we've got some undulations in this rear section, the rear under section, rear valance, I don't know if that's what you'd call it, but we've got some slight wobbles in that. There's been a few little skims, but it's got to that point where if we do any more skimming, we're going to be chasing our tails. It's better to just put a couple of heavy layers of polyester spray surfacer on it, and then block that back, and that should get us out of any wobbles that are in there. The wobbles are actually in the panel, not really in the fitment of the panel. They're just residual stresses and wobbles from the panel being pressed. And we could spend a long time panel beating it, or put a couple of coats of polyester on it. So it's getting a couple of coats of polyester, get blocked back. I think we'll be about there. Again, we've said it a lot of times on these videos, but as a quick fill-in, as the reason why we're spraying this polyester surfacer, we don't use high build primer at all. We've stopped using high build primer. The epoxy that we use as the final sealer is actually quite high build anyway, incidentally, but the spray surfacer is the only thing we apply for build. We don't do this and then high build primer. This is our high build primer. It doesn't sink. It's really good stuff. It's very stable and it doesn't sink like high build primer does. So that's why we're doing this. And that's why there is quite a lot of this going on, because there won't be any high build primer going on other than the epoxy sealer. So that's where we're at with the E-Type basically. Lots of prep going on that. We're getting there pretty well with the prep. That's probably one of the more dramatic bits left to do. So yeah, E-Type's progressing really well in here. I think at that I'm going to let Mark carry on, so that's probably a good time to round off. So see you again next week.